Hello, my name is Reagan McAllister, and I've spent the last few months researching the idea of congressional term limits in the United States of America. The idea of congressional term limits has been a heavily debated topic since the early 1990s, but has been discussed as early as the 1970s. Certain aspects of Congress, such as career politicians and a decrease in past legislation, have led to more and more Americans becoming in favor of term limits. With the research that I have conducted over the last semester, I have come to the conclusion that term limits need to be placed on our members of Congress in order to ensure that the legislative branch becomes what it was intended to be by our founding fathers, a representation of the American people. Like I previously stated, career politicians and a decrease in past legislation are two of the main reasons that term limits need to be implemented. Americans despise certain politicians like Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi, both who have spent the majority of their careers either in Washington or just in politics in general. Americans also realize that Congress only decides to work together in times of crisis, which understandably angers them. Both of these issues would go away if term limits were implemented. Nobody could make a career in politics because they would have limitations set upon them, so obviously they couldn't run for an unlimited amount of terms. And new people are more likely to work together and go across the aisle and be understanding of other viewpoints in order to pass legislation. A great point that was brought to my attention while researching this topic was that today's Congress is not what the Founding Fathers intended for it to be at all. The Founding Fathers intended for the Congress to be a part-time job for the common American, not the full-time job for the elites of our society that it is today. Another point was that Congress lacks diversity greatly. America is one of the most diverse countries in the world. However, 40% of America's non-white population is underrepresented in the legislative branch. 78% of today's Congress is white. However, only 61% of the American population is white. There's a drastic difference in the number of Americans who are white and the number of Americans who aren't white that are in Congress. Another fascinating fact that I learned while researching is that the American people who constantly re-elect the same people are to blame for this phenomenon. If this issue does not get fixed with term limits, there could be little to no legislation passed through our legislative branch, and an even lower voter turnout than there already is. The most interesting sources that I found while researching were by Bill Frenzel and Thomas Mann. Frenzel discusses America's need for term limits, and Mann discusses that they aren't going to fix what's wrong with Congress. However, the thing that I think is most interesting about these two articles is that Mann's article is a direct rebuttal to what Frenzel had to say in his, which is something that I found very fascinating about these two. The main issue that I had when researching this topic was finding articles that discussed what would happen if term limits were not implemented. There were so many articles that were discussing a world with term limits, but it was hard to find one that discussed a continued world without them and the repercussions of what would happen if we do not implement them. I thoroughly enjoyed researching this topic, and I hope that you learned something new and you understand the need for term limits like I do. Thank you.